As the debate between active and passive investing continues, an alternative has evolved that aims to bridge the gap. Similar to active investment management, multi-factor indexing seeks to outperform cap-weighted strategies. However, the index-based approach does not rely on human emotion or intuition for decision-making, and instead employs the transparent, rules-based elements of passive investing. Hello, I'm Michael Mell, Director of Custom Indices at S&P Dow Jones Indices. Joining me today is Bill Belden, Managing Director and Head of ETF Business Development at Guggenheim Investments. Welcome, Bill. How you doing?
Doing great, Michael. Good to be with you.
Glad to have you from Chicago. You know it's one of my favorite cities, but it's always good to bring you here to New York.
Great to visit here.
There we go. Great. So let's dive right on into it. Can you explain where the value in multi-factor indices can be found? In other words, could this be viewed as a potential replacement for an active allocation?
Sure. So if you look at how multi-factor has evolved into the index and ETF marketplace, it really comes from contrast against single-factor strategies or market cap-weighted strategies. And the value that's sought by multi-factor is achieving a more consistent, stable return stream with risk considerations, so that when you compare it against what investors are currently using, you can clearly see the value of a multi-factor approach. When looking at single factors, certainly those can, and in many cases do, outperform over time, but it's very difficult to know exactly when those periods of outperformance are going to be achieved. So if you look at a couple of the better known examples like value or low volatility, for example, you certainly have seen periods of outperformance, but recently those have been underachievers from a performance comparison standpoint, and so it's seeking to bring factors like value, like volatility together along with some other factors to get a better risk-adjusted return profile.
To smooth out the returns.
Exactly.
Great. So overall, what are some of the key things to consider when evaluating a multi-factor approach? Do you look at performance alone or in combination with other criteria such as risk-return matrix? I mean, it's sort of dovetailing with what we were saying earlier, but how do we judge this? And let's talk about that.
Yeah, so certainly when you evaluate the merits or the effectiveness of a multi-factor approach, it really is seeking to smooth out that return stream. So that is usually done on a relative basis or in comparison to what other alternatives might be. So the standard bearer of large cap core equity holdings in the US is the S&P 500. So if you can deliver a return stream that outperforms the S&P 500 more consistently with less volatility or less risk, then you've basically achieved your objective. And similar comparisons should be done with multi-factors against other single-factor strategies as well as competition in the multi-factor space.
So can you talk about the Guggenheim Multi-Factor Large Cap Index? How is it constructed and what factors are captured in the index? In other words, what is it seeking to achieve? Because there's so many multi-factor indexes out there. In particular, what is the core focus of this index?
Yes, sure. So multi-factor approaches in many instances emphasize just a handful of factors. So for example, value, quality, momentum have been combined to deliver a multi-factor approach. At Guggenheim, we undertook an effort to identify additional factors that can contribute to a multi-factor approach, and that contribution takes the form of returns, lower risk, low correlation, or both, to add to the results that a multi-factor approach undertakes. So in our case, we actually found 7 different factors that achieved those objectives, and we classify them under fundamental, and by fundamental we mean attributes that are specific to a company itself. So its value, its growth, or its quality. And we wed those with non-fundamental factors which are really specific to the stock. So if you look at momentum, if you look at volatility, if you look at short interest, or if you look at liquidity, for example, a couple of factors which aren't commonly used, we have found that those have benefited the results through our research, and those were all inputs into our multi-factor strategy.
Okay, great. So it's almost like what you've done is you have your sort of traditional factors which have been used often in like stock analysis, but at the same time you're taking it a level deeper to sort of look at how the components of the index are behaving relative to, let's say, their peers in the market, with maybe a gear to things like momentum and liquidity and whatnot, almost like trading as part of the overall algorithm.
Exactly. When we're doing that value assessment at the individual factor level, it's not so much how did each individual factor perform in an absolute sense, but how did it perform when we break it down amongst deciles within a stock universe? And it's not always the highest, but it's perhaps the largest difference between the top and the bottom decile where you can really identify where that value is actually being derived from at the factor level. And so we use the 7 that I alluded to a moment ago. We basically get the top 50 that we have the highest conviction around, controlling for sector exposure, and we equally weight them and rebalance every quarter.
Okay, great. I'd like to learn why Guggenheim decided that the 50 stocks in this index should be drawn from the S&P 500. Did it provide the best type of platform? In other words, why the 500?
Well, basically the 500 is the most well-known, most commonly adopted, best large cap equity index in the world. And,
I agree.
And we've utilized it across a number of other different strategy deliveries, right. And certainly it made perfect sense for us to build our multi-cap factor strategy off of the S&P 500. We are basically designing this strategy to be a large cap core equity holding. And if in fact you're going to achieve that outcome, certainly you measure it against the S&P 500 universe.
Great, great. So final question of the day. When considering a portfolio of passive indices, do you view the index as a complement to a traditional index, or is it designed to be part of a different type of allocation strategy or portfolio? In other words, how do you use this?
Well, as I was mentioning, we really designed it with the thought in mind that it would be a core equity holding. So it would be more of a replacement for a traditional or a cap-weighted index as opposed to a complement to one.
Okay.
And if you look at the attributes that we're seeking to achieve through this strategy, basically, again, consistent, stable outperformance, that really aligns with what a large cap core equity allocation should be designed to achieve.
So in other words, instead of hiring, let's say, a stock picker, you put your allocation into something like this.
Exactly.
Got it. Great. All right. Well, Bill, thanks a ton for your insights on multi-factor indexing today. We always appreciate having you here. To learn more about custom indexing, visit us at www.spdji.com/custom indices.